Howdy folks, and welcome back to No Guarantees. Today I'm going to be covering absolutely everything you need to know to do a full four-corner brake job on your YJ. Before we break out any tools or open up any boxes, I want to cover some of the differences between the years.
Starting up front, the year brake is 87 to 89 and then 90 to 95. The 87 to 89s have shorter rotors if you measure them from top to bottom, and they're not ventilated. They're just a flat piece of metal. While the 90 to 95s are a little bit taller and they are ventilated. As far as the calipers go, the 87 to 89s have the banjo bolt up in the side of the caliper, while the 90 to 95s have it right in the center. Moving back to the rear, the year brake is 87 to 90 and 91 to 95. The 87 to 90s have 10-inch drums and non-C-clip axle shafts, while the 91 to 95s have 9-inch drums and C-clip shafts. I want to reemphasize one more time that the year brake is different for the front and rear axle. Again, the front axle is 87 to 89 and 90 to 95, while the rear is 87 to 90 and 91 to 95. I know that messes a lot of people up, especially because the technology brake on these things is typically 87 to 90 and 91 to 95. Just remember that it's a little bit different for your front axle. First things first, I'm going to go around to all four corners and loosen up all the lug nuts. Most of the time they're 3/4 inch, but I have seen both 11/16 and 13/16. Taking our first look in here, this is pretty much what you guys should expect. The rotor is a little bit grooved, but would be otherwise serviceable, and the pads have a decent amount of material on them, but I'll be replacing them anyway. My flex hose and caliper also look relatively new, which lines up with the previous owner's story. He had told me that he did them a couple of years ago. That being said, my plan for the front brakes is to replace the rotor, pads, and flex hose, and then just clean up and repaint the caliper. While I'm taking a look in here, it looks like the tie rod ends and ball joints also need to be replaced, so if that's something you guys would like to see, just let me know. Coming around to the other side, it's much of the same. This rotor is worse, but I'd say everything else looks a little bit better. First things first, we can pull off the caliper. For whatever reason, this one in particular uses two 12.8mm bolts. I've never seen that on any YJ I've worked on. I'm not sure if that's original hardware or what. Every other YJ I've worked on has used a regular 6-point 12mm socket. So this is definitely peculiar, especially because the other side does use the 12mm 6-point. And once you get the caliper off the brake rotor, the most important thing is not to let this dangle. You don't want to put any excess stress on the soft line. So I like to sit mine right up here, just on top of everything and out of the way. And now we can pull off the rotor. As you can see, mine is pretty stuck and doesn't just want to let go. I have a fix for that when we put all this back together to make sure it doesn't happen to the next guy. Now, you don't want to just take a hammer and start beating on the back of the rotor. If you were to crack this thing and you can't get it off, there's no way you could drive it anywhere. The best thing to do is to take a rubber mallet or a hammer and block of wood and beat all the way around on the hat of the rotor to loosen everything up. You can also take some heat and heat in here. I typically try to avoid that to make sure I'm not damaging the hub or anything, but as long as you're careful with it, that should be fine too. And there we go. And I try to avoid doing that if I can, but since I'm replacing the rotor anyway, I'm not too worried about it. I take a screwdriver and pry it just very gently between the knuckle and the rotor itself. I try to use the pointed end of the screwdriver on the knuckle and the flat, smooth side of the screwdriver on the rotor. Now that everything is disassembled, I'm going to take a wire brush and some paint and just clean up everything in here to keep it from rusting any worse. You guys can see that I've cleaned up and painted everything over here, and while that's drying, we can get to work on the caliper. So, first things first, these are called your slide pins, and they're supposed to be sliding freely. As you can see, mine obviously are not. So when we put everything back together, we're going to have to clean them up and grease them up so they do. I've got some high temp engine paint, and that's always worked fine for me. The first thing I'm going to do is replace the bleeder screw inside the caliper. It's not necessary, but it's something I do every time I replace pads, pretty much no matter what. I like to buy them by the 10-pack. It's relatively cheap, and it's way easier to replace them before you snap them off. Now we can go ahead and clean up and lubricate our bolts and our slide pins. You can see the differences between the two sets that I was talking about earlier. These ones are clearly smaller and 12-point rather than the larger 6-point. It does tend to help when you only work on one type of vehicle, so I did find some extra 6-point bolts in my stash and some extra boots for the slide pins, so I'll be using all of this as well. Next up, we can take our bushings and get them back inside the caliper. The first thing I like to do is take some grease and put it on this middle section. That way, if we ever have to take this all apart again, they'll come out a little bit easier. They make special brake grease that a lot of people like to use, but I just use regular old red grease and I've never had an issue. Next up, we can take that same grease and put it on the outside of our slide pins. I should mention that before I did all of this, I sprayed everything down with some brake clean just to clean it all up. Next up, we can get the rotor on. You can see I took some grease and spread it all around the hub. That's just to make sure the next time we go to pull this rotor off, it comes off easily. The other thing I like to do before I put the rotor on is to take some grease and put it on our caliper slides. It's very important that these are lubricated well because they allow the calipers to slide back and forth. Now that everything is lubricated, I like to take the rotor and put it on backwards. That allows me to easily clean the inside of the rotor. Just some brake clean on a rag. And we want to wipe off any of the oily coating that gets on there from shipping. Now we can flip the rotor around, making sure not to touch either of the surfaces. You don't want to get any oils from your hands onto the rotor either. Flipped back around, we can again take some brake clean and a rag and clean this side. Now, the original plan was to reuse this caliper, but the more I dive into it, the more it seems like the caliper on the other side was replaced, but this one was not. You can see how the piston is sticking up out of the caliper. This was after I put the biggest clamp that I have on it, trying to squish that back in and opening the bleeder and every other trick I know. I just could not get this piston to go back in. The next example is these slide pins. It is so difficult to move these, especially in this direction. There's just no moving them back and forth. Also, if we take a look at the brake pads, you can see how thick this one is and how thin this one is. To me, that means that everything is not moving as well as it should be. Also, if I take a look at the thicker pad in particular, you can see how much thinner it is on this side than this side. To me, that lines up with what I'm seeing, where one slide pin is moving better than the other. So, taking all of that into consideration, I decided to just get a new caliper. Brakes are not the kind of thing you want to mess around on, and I certainly won't be. Coming over to the other side, I've got everything back together, and it all looks pretty good. The caliper was moving freely, it doesn't have any corrosion on it like the one on the other side did, so I think it was replaced at least relatively recently. I haven't done either soft line yet, I'm waiting to do both of them at once. That being said, I did crack both of the brake lines on either side. The one on the driver's side broke free without any issues, but the one on the passenger side fought me a little bit. I ended up having to make a new brake line, And I was planning on remaking the whole one that wraps all the way around the front, but somebody had already put a union in right about here. And for whatever reason, they didn't replace the last 2 feet of the line. That just sounds silly to me. And typically, I would prefer to replace the entire thing, but since this whole section was new and they used the correct type of fitting, I just replaced this little section. I figured I might as well give a quick brake line making tutorial. There are a couple things that you're going to need. The first thing being some brake line itself. Sometimes you get lucky and there's enough room on the end of the broken line where you can just move that flare back, flare it again, and everything connects up. But in situations like I had up here, there's just not enough room, so new line it is. You can buy this stuff in 25-foot rolls, and it's relatively inexpensive. You're also going to need some tube nuts. Most of the time you can reuse the ones on the original line, but if they're stripped, it's good to have some around. The next thing you're going to need is a tubing cutter. These are pretty universal and pretty cheap, and they definitely come in handy. I've got a scrap piece of brake line right here, and I'll show you guys how this works. If you see this groove down here in the bottom of the cutter, that's where you want the brake line to sit. And tighten it down so it's just touching. Now you can see the brake line is sandwiched inside that groove between the blade and these 2 rollers. You can tighten it down so it's just barely snug, and then spin it around a couple times. Once it starts to get loose, like it is here, tighten it down a little bit more, and keep spinning it. You're going to keep doing this over and over again until the end of the brake line pops off. Especially when you get to the end, it's very important that you don't just wrench down on this knob, because then you'll end up bending the tube and you'll never get it to seal. And there we go, we've got a nice, clean, even cut on our brake line. But before we go to flare it, we need to clean it up a little bit more. That's where your internal and external deburring tool comes in. Take your tool, stick it on the inside of that brake line, and move it back and forth. All that's doing is cleaning out that inside edge. Now we can flip it around and use the external side. You can see these 3 cutters that cut a chamfer and clean up this outside edge. And if I zoom in here real close, you can see that chamfer edge right there. That's exactly how we want it to look. Now we can slide on our tube nut. Something I should have mentioned during the cutting portion is when you're cutting that brake line, make sure you have a straight section long enough for your tube nut and for your flare tool. So something about this long is typically good. Slide that on, and we can put on our flare tool. I like this style right here. I find them the easiest to use and the easiest to get nice flares with. Some people like the ones that have the little stands on them and you can go through all the different sizes, but I've never had good luck with them. And this style of tool is super easy to use. You slide the brake line inside this hole right here until the edge of it lines up with this line over here. You can see the end of the brake line peeking through, so right now I'm a little bit too far. We'll back it off until it's even with the center of that line. And now we can take a 10mm wrench and tighten down these 2 bolts. And it's always good to make sure your brake line still lines up with this line, and ours definitely does. Don't be afraid to tighten down these 2 bolts a whole lot, because you want to make sure this brake line doesn't move at all. Next up, we've got this little guy. You can see right here it says OP1 and a little arrow. Brake lines use what are called double flares. So we're going to run this in, that creates the single flare, turn it around, run it down again, and that creates the double flare. When you're using these dies to make the flares, you want to make sure you keep them lubricated. Just a little bit of grease on the tip is good enough. And there it is with some grease, putting it inside the rest of the block. Tightening down by hand, and then take your 11/16 wrench and tighten it down the rest of the way. And you want to tighten it down until it completely bottoms out on the rest of the tool. Now we can run it all the way back out, put some grease on the other side, and do the exact same thing. And there we go, completely bottomed out. Loosen up our 10mm nuts. And there we go, a nice, even double flare. Back over to the driver's side, we can get the brake pads in. First, you need to get the one on the inside that clicks into the piston. And now we can get the outside one on. All you do is pull these wings back, and then these studs pop into these holes down here. And now we can go ahead and get the caliper into place. The first thing I want to mention is you can see these brake pads have 2 nubs or 1 nub. It doesn't matter which side you put the 1 nub or 2 nubs on, as long as they're both the same. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 1. And the last thing we need to check before we put the caliper on is these bushings. Make sure you've got these pushed all the way up to the top, or they're more likely to hit on your caliper bracket. And there we go. Now I can take my greased up bolts and tighten them down. I know it's a little bit weird how much grease there is when it comes to brakes, but you want everything sliding easily so that the pads can wear evenly. And there we go. We are wrapped up down here, everything except for the soft line. The end of the soft line that bolts to the frame is right here. You can see the hard line going into it and then the soft line itself. The first thing I like to do is take a flare wrench and loosen up that fitting right there. I like to loosen it up before I remove the bolt that holds the soft line in place. I just find it makes it a little bit easier. And hopefully you guys can see that I've got my wrench on it way down there. I like to just take the end of the wrench and move it back and forth a couple times. I'm not completely undoing the fitting yet. We're not ready for that, but I like to make sure everything is moving freely before we unbolt it. And if we take a look down here, the soft line is disconnected from the frame. This is the setup that I use to get to it. There's my T40 Torx, a universal joint, and then a long extension up to my ratchet. Using that, I was able to fish my ratchet down through this hole right here and get to the bolt. You don't need to do all that, but with the tools I've got, that was the easiest way for me. Especially taking a look at the other side, that bolt has plenty of room. And now we can go ahead and hook up the soft line. I like to start on the caliper side and then do the brake line side. The soft line sits behind the caliper in this orientation, so the flat side goes towards the hub. And as far as bolting it down, it goes banjo bolt, crush washer, brake line, and then the other crush washer. And if you're reusing your original banjo bolt, there's nothing wrong with that. Just take some brake clean and blow it out. And there we go. There's no need to get it super tight. Even if it's leaking a little bit, the best thing you can do is back it off a little bit and then tighten it down just a little bit more than it was before. There's no need to just caveman it all at once. And now we can attach the hard line to the soft line. I like to leave the soft line unbolted until we hook everything up. I just think it makes it a little bit easier to align. And now that it's as tight as I can get it by hand, I'll put the bolt in to hold the soft line to the frame and then tighten down the flare nut the rest of the way. And there we go. That's the front brakes completely finished up. The only thing we have left to do is bleed them, but I'm going to wait to do that until I finish the rear brakes as well. So it's time to move back to the rear of the Jeep. Now we can get to work on the rear brakes. First things first, the emergency brake uses the same shoes that the regular brakes do. So coming around to the inside of the Jeep, pull on your e-brake cable and make sure you release it. Now we can pull off the rear drum. Sometimes they come off easily and other times they're quite stuck. If yours is stuck, just like the rotors on the front, the best thing you can do is take some heat and heat up around this center area right here, and take a piece of wood and a hammer and beat all the way around on the outside of the drum. For whatever reason, these ones are extremely loose and they come off without much issue. And before we start taking everything apart, I'm going to give everything a thorough bath of brake clean. Not only does it make it easier to work on, it also makes it easier to see what everything is and where it's going. Drum brakes aren't very complicated, but there are a lot of pieces to them. Before you take anything apart, I highly recommend you take a bunch of pictures so you know how everything looks. I also prefer to only take one side apart at a time and then come back and do the other, so you always have at least one side that you can reference. This is an important picture right here. We've got our two main springs, our self-adjuster cable, our wheel cylinder, and the upper portion of our parking brake. On the sides, we've got both of these springs that hold the shoes into place. We've also got the guide for the self-adjuster cable right here. And then coming down low, we've got the self-adjuster itself, the self-adjuster lever and its spring, the smaller bottom spring, and behind that is the parking brake stuff. Now we can pull off our two main springs. I'm going to do my best to show taking off all of these pieces with the proper drum brake tools and common hand tools. As far as common hand tools go, I like to just use a pair of pliers and a flathead screwdriver. If you take your pair of pliers, put it on the spring pin and on the end of the spring, and pinch them together, it gives you enough room to sneak a flathead screwdriver in there. After that, you just need to mess with it until the spring comes off. And there we go. It's a little bit janky, but it gets the job done. And now we can take the proper spring tool, which looks something like this, and use that to take off the other one. As you can see, it makes the job easier, but it's definitely not necessary. This is actually the first set of drum brakes that I've done with the proper tools. Next up, we can get the self-adjuster cable out of the way. That's this guy right here. And here it is, out of the way. We can also finish pulling our main springs off. And we can take off this piece right here. I honestly don't know what it is. It might just be a spacer. Next up, we can get the brake shoes off. The way to do that is by taking a finger and putting it on the pin on the backside, and then taking a pair of pliers to quarter turn the spring. And here's that pin from the backside. And on the right side, here is the specialized tool. Up top, this is your parking brake spreader bar, and down here, this is the other piece of the parking brake. It just slides off this nub right here. And then I like to disconnect the bottom spring and the self-adjuster with the shoes off the Jeep. Whatever you find is easier. And the last piece is this lever arm right here. I just pull this spring down and out of the way, and it comes right off. Slide the lever arm forward and off, and the spring comes off as well. And you may or may not have to reuse this pin. That just depends on your hardware kit and on your new shoes. And before I take the old wheel cylinder off, I'm going to take a wire brush and some paint and just clean up everything in here. I've got everything painted up and mostly dry, so now we can pull off the wheel cylinder. Looking at the back side, you can see those two bolts, the bleeder up top and the brake line down below. And I did have to put this slight bend in my flare wrench just to get it past the backing plate. Now, I should have mentioned this more up front, and I'm definitely going to hit on it here. Do your best to be extremely careful with these brake lines unless you plan on replacing them. For whatever reason, the rear ones in particular tend to give me issues. You can see I've got my flare wrench on that nut, and if I go to unscrew it, you can see how the whole brake line moves. That's because the flare nut is moving easily inside the wheel cylinder, but the brake line and the flare are rusted together. The best thing you can do in this circumstance is take some heat from a torch and heat up this area, and then be very, very careful trying to remove it. I have seen some people take a pair of vice grips and gently grab this part of the brake line, but I definitely try to avoid that as you don't want to smush it. And to get the new wheel cylinder in place, I like to set it up in there and get the brake line in the first couple threads, and then I'll worry about mounting it down. Next up, we can re-grease the 6 contact points between the backing plate and the shoes. I should be able to put in some pictures of where they are from when this thing was all dirty, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You should be able to tell them because they have a couple lines on them that kind of indicate where they're supposed to hold grease. And there's no need to go crazy with it, just enough to cover the pad. You don't want to get it all over the rest of the backing plate because it'll just trap dirt. Next up, we can get the brake shoes on. Here is that pin I was talking about that you may or may not need to transfer over from your old shoes. If you're wondering which shoe goes in the front and which shoe goes in the back, it's just like school pictures. The tall ones go in the back. And now we can get our brake shoes up into place. You can see these 3 flat spots right here. 1, 2, 3. Those are what goes on our 3 contact points on this side. And we can also get our pin through the shoe. And put it back on with our spring and cap. Some drum brakes have little pins that go in here between your wheel cylinder and your brake shoes. Just don't forget those if you're watching this video and working on another model. Next up, we can get one of our parking brake levers back in. I find it easier to pull the shoe out of the way and then sneak the lever in afterwards, just so you don't have as many pieces in your hands while you're trying to get everything together. Take your parking brake cable, put it back on the end of the lever. There we go. Now that it's back in place, something like that, we can fish it in and get this slot right here lined up with this slot in the top of the shoe. And I probably should have mentioned this before we started. I bought one of these hardware kits from Rock Auto when I'm putting this whole thing back together. I think it was like $5 or $6 for the whole bag of springs and everything, and it's definitely well worth it, even just for peace of mind that you no longer have worn out springs back here. Next up, we can get the self-adjuster lever back into place. Here is the spring for it. It just slides over the peg, and then the lever goes on top of it. You put the peg inside the big hole, slide it down to the bottom hole, and flip the spring up into place. Next up, we can get the self-adjuster in place. As you can see, I am reusing the old one, which there's nothing wrong with, but you need to make sure that it's properly lubricated. You can see I've got the threads all the way open, so I can take some grease and make sure they're well lubricated. And then when I'm setting up my brakes, I like to screw it all the way in. And we need to lubricate the other end as well as the washer that goes between it and the rest of the self-adjuster. And now we can get the self-adjuster itself back into the brake. The part that unthreads goes towards the front. So here's that angular portion I was talking about, and the self-adjuster just slides right in on both sides. Next up, we can get the bottom spring in. It goes into the larger bottom hole on either shoe. And there's our bottom spring back in place. It's kind of hard to see because it's on top of the e-brake cable, but it goes from that larger hole right there to that larger hole right there. Next up, we can get the self-adjuster lever back in. This hook right here goes onto this arm right there of the self-adjuster lever. So it sits something like that. We'll worry about the upper end in a moment. Next up, we can get our other parking brake arm back in place. There's a couple orientation things to keep in mind. The first one being that the hump in the arm goes upwards towards the top. The next one being that the spring goes on the front and the spring goes on the part that narrows down right here. So it goes on something like that. And then also the little tang that comes off the bottom of the spring points downwards. And there we go. It'll sit something like that once we get our upper springs in place. Next up, we can get this little bat-shaped guy in place. And now we can get our rear spring and our cable guide in place. Something I want to mention while I have the cable guide out of the brake is you can see this slot in the middle of the cable guide. That's the guide for the cable. It's a very common mistake that people make when they run the cable around this guide, that it falls back here between the shoe and the edge of the guide. That's incorrect, and it can pinch the cable or damage it over time. But before we install that spring, we need to run the cable across the cable guide. Just like that, making sure it's in the proper groove. Now we can get this spring installed. For the first one, I'm going to use my spring install tool, and for the second one, I'm just going to use a wrench. And keeping to my promise about not always using the proper tools, you can use a small wrench. This one is a 5/16, and even smaller might be better. You can use it the same way we used our spring tool, and hopefully it works for you. And there we go. As you can see, it's definitely not as easy as using the spring tool, but it's definitely possible. And there we go. Now our drum brake is completely back together. Now is the perfect time to look over everything and make sure everything matches the pictures that we took at the beginning. As a couple examples of things I'd like to check for, let's run through it. Starting up top, check your order on this front pin. It should go spring, spring, self-adjuster cable, bat wings, and then your two shoes. Also make sure that your parking levers are correctly seated on both shoes. Make sure your self-adjuster cable goes through the guide correctly. And on the bottom, make sure your spring is in the proper holes. And if you twist your self-adjuster, everything moves freely. While you guys weren't looking, I went ahead and finished up the passenger side brake as well as the brake line that drops down to the rear axle. While I was in here, I also replaced that wheel seal that I showed you guys was leaking. And I replaced the diff cover seal as well. Now we can move on to bleeding the brakes, and there's two really important things here. Number one, and the most obvious thing, is getting all of the air out of the brake lines. Air is compressible, and you don't want that taking up all of your braking power. The second most important thing is making sure you start furthest away from your master cylinder. So in our case, in the passenger side rear, and then doing the driver's side rear, passenger side front, and then finishing off with the driver's side front. And I've got a state-of-the-art solo bleeder, so I can do this myself. Coming into the driver's seat, I like to press down on my brake pedal 3 times and hold it on the third one. So 1, 2, 3. Now I can take my state-of-the-art solo brake bleeder and put it on the pedal, holding it depressed. There we go. Pedal is all the way in. There's pressure on the brake system. You can see I've got my wrench on that bleeder and my tube on it as well. I'm going to crack the bleeder, let out a small amount of fluid, and watch for any bubbles. And there we go. As you can see, there's no bubbles in my brake fluid. Surprise, surprise, I actually already went around and bled all 4 corners. So yes, this method does 100% work. It's a little bit more time consuming than getting a friend, family member, or pet to hold down that brake pedal, but if you want to do it by yourself, this is the easiest and cheapest way. Next up, we can talk about adjusting your rear brakes. I've already done the one on this side to show exactly what it should look like. You can see when I go to spin this drum, it has constant, even drag, which is exactly what you're looking for. So it's not super easy to turn, and I can hear there is a little bit of drag inside of it, which is perfect. Your self-adjusters can handle a lot, but they can't handle everything. You have to give them at least a starting point. Coming around to the other side, you can see just how loose this drum is. That's way too loose, and it'll take these self-adjusters forever to catch up with this drum if they ever do. Coming around to the back side of the drum, we need to get access to our self-adjuster. It's right behind this little rubber cover right here. And in order to spread those shoes, the back of the star wheel needs to come down. So I'm going to get my screwdriver in here and push my handle upward to spread those shoes. And I can't really show it with one hand while I'm down here, but I like to move the star wheel a little bit and then move the drum, just to see how it feels. And this feels pretty good. And you may or may not have to adjust your emergency brake. You do that with this guy right here. It runs right along the driver's side frame rail. If your emergency brake has too much tension, meaning even with your e-brake off, there's a ton of pressure on these cables, loosen up this nut right here and you'll be golden. On the opposite side, if these cables don't get tight enough, even with your e-brake all the way down, tighten this up and you'll be good to go. And per tradition, let's talk about cost. And I'm going to try to make this quick because I think you guys can probably see and hear that it's raining and thundering. First things first, a lot of the parts in this video, as well as future videos, came from Rock Auto. And as you guys know, there is a shipping fee associated with that. So shipping for all of those parts was $68. The driver's side caliper was $45. Brake fluid was $9. A 12-pack of brake clean was $42. The 3 brake hoses were $13, $13, and $9 for the 2 fronts and the rears respectively. A 10-pack of brake bleeders for the front calipers was $7. The rear wheel cylinders were $13. The brake shoes for the rear were $22. The brake pads were $15. The brake drum hardware kit for the rear was $5. The diff seal and axle seals for the rear were $17. The gear oil for the rear to fill it back up was $15. And the rotors for the front were $54. That brings the total for the video to $347, and the total for the project so far to $2,753. I think for my goal with this thing, we're still definitely on track to make some money and have some fun doing it. If you guys missed the last couple videos, we did a full frame and body mount repair, and we also replaced the ignition cylinder in the column to get this thing running. As far as future videos go, I want to give this thing an engine tune-up. I've got a complete interior and exterior cosmetic video, and then some final touches before we get this thing ready to be sold. So, thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to go inside and get out of this rain. I'll see you next time on No Guarantees. Really picking up now, huh? Yep. Oh, hey, bud. I don't know if these 8mm 13 points are original hardware or what, and I just realized they're 12 points. Brake light. Can't believe you guys are hanging out in the rain, freaks.